essential to human life and well-being, serving various functions such as meeting nutritional needs, shaping cultural identity, and fostering social connections. Some argue that by prioritizing local agriculture and traditional knowledge, food sovereignty could address global challenges like hunger, climate change, and economic disparity. With me today in the studio is Wendie Wilson to discuss food sovereignty, a cultural advocate and a native of the Uniacke Square community, Square Town, here in Nova Scotia. Welcome to the show, Wendie. Thank you for
Nicole.
being here.
My pleasure.
So before we get into anything, tell us a little bit who Wendie Wilson is.
So my name is Wendie Wilson, and I'm an educator. I've been an educator over the last 20 years, public education, working in several local schools around the community, mostly in Halifax, the community where I'm from, Uniacke Square community. I worked at Joe Howe for the longest duration. So I am also a cultural advocate. I am what I consider myself now a food sovereignist.
Yes.
And I'm an advocate. I advocate in my daytime job as well with the Nova Scotia Teachers Union. I'm an executive staff officer, BIPOC engagement and advocacy. Although I don't love that term BIPOC, but
Right.
it definitely describes the members that I work with. So happy to wear that hat to be able to work, engage with Black and Indigenous folks and racialized teachers as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that introduction. Now let's talk about food sovereignty, because that's the whole reason why you're here, other than you look fabulous today, if I was going to say. I love that white on you.
Back at you.
Well, you know, we got to keep it real, right?
Yeah.
So can you start by explaining what food sovereignty is and what it means and why it's an important topic for communities?
So food sovereignty is really putting the control of food and food systems back in the hands of the people.
Okay.
So it's about knowing where your food comes from, who produces it. It's about you being an active participant in, growing your food or accessing your food. And it's also about being able to profit from that food as well. Food is a big business. And so we want to be, economically sustainable. And so it's a circular ecosystem. That's what food sovereignty is. I'll explain a little bit later the difference between food sovereignty and food security.
Right. Which is probably my next question. Okay. So, what is the difference and why is it crucial to address these two different things?
Okay. So I'm going to start by just kind of giving you an example of what food security is. Many of us already know, but I am a food secure person. I can get around to the different restaurants and grocery stores. Yeah. I have a pretty good job, so I can afford to buy just about whatever I want in any of these markets or grocery stores. I also have a kitchen where I can prepare my food. I'm, somewhat educated, so I know what I should be eating. But I don't know where my food comes from. Right. So if there's a disruption in the processing, in the handling process, transportation, distribution, if there's a growing disruption, then I'm out of luck.
Right.
Where is my food coming from? Right. So food sovereignty is about knowing where your food comes from. And I will say that food sovereignty is also based in the land. Right. And so, therefore, it means that food sovereignty is about eating local as well.
Okay. So our local farmers and helping, be a part of what they grow in the ground to be circulated back in the community.
Yeah. So it's about being self-sufficient. Okay.
I like that. And I can say that we have a lot of folks in the community that I am aware of to have their backyard gardens or their raised garden beds or whatever that they're very proud of. May not always have all of the fruits and vegetables, but they have something to put on the table.
Yeah. And this is something that I just started doing in the last few years. This is my third year growing in my backyard. I took the Bridge into Agriculture program with Dalhousie, and so learned a lot about how to grow food and the science behind growing food, but more importantly, the social justice aspect of food.
Yes. Okay, so Wendie, this is exciting stuff, but yet it's also very informative. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see community facing when achieving food sovereignty?
What I've noticed in my career as a teacher and what brought me to this movement was accessibility. As a teacher, I was seeing what students were eating during their learning day, what they were having for lunch. Once upon a time when I was a kid, and actually during the first half of my career, children actually walked home for lunch and they came back. So I really wouldn't know what they were having. But then in a lot of the city schools, there isn't a cafeteria. So students eat right in front of you in your classroom. So you see what they're consuming. And so just access, I think the knowledge around, foods that omega-3s and proteins and things that maybe you should try to be consuming. Just like if you're going to work out, you're in the gym, you're going to eat certain foods. And when you're working out in the classroom, you're working out your brain. And, there's certain foods that actually help you to optimize your learning time and your learning day. And so I just noticed that a lot of students didn't have, in some schools didn't have access to those foods. And so access is huge. Access, accessibility, affordability, even, if we bring it right down to having a grocery store in your community.
That's right.
So I grew up, I'm going to share a little story with you. When I grew up in Uniacke Square back in the 70s, there was a 70s, 80s, there was a grocery store on Goddess Street, Sobeys.
Right.
I guess I'm okay to mention names of stores. So Sobeys was there, and then Sobeys eventually moved out of the community to North Street, right? Oh, yeah. And when they moved out, there's a building there now that across from the North End Library, that lot sat vacant for so long.
Yes.
People just rocky, people parked the cars there. They weren't using it for anything, and eventually they sold it and developed it. But what I learned just only yesterday, but what I knew is that another grocery store couldn't go there. So Sobeys had something called a restrictive covenant.
Yes.
So that another grocery store couldn't come in. And
was the intent for them to come back in?
Never to come back.
Okay.
Now I don't know what their intentions were, but they never did come back. Okay. And this is 40 years later, or whatever. This is 70s and 80s. So I always thought, okay, I can understand healthy competition. You don't want someone, you're leaving a lot and someone's going to build, they're only just up the street, right? They're not that far. But what I learned yesterday is that they put a restrictive covenant on many properties in the community so that there could never be not never, but it would be very difficult to find space to build a grocery store in that community, therefore rendering people unable to access the whole foods that they need in order to, function on a day-to-day basis and and also be healthy. What people could do is they could definitely walk up. If you're able-bodied, you could walk up to...
But the convenience of having one in your community is the whole blessing.
It's the convenience because you walk up to Sobeys, but then how do you get your groceries home? Right? You walk up to Sobeys, and what do you leave off your table because it's too heavy or too cumbersome to bring on the bus or to walk?
On the way home or something like that. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I was really disappointed, I guess. I was... a little angry about it because I thought about the detrimental impact that had on the community that I grew up in.
Absolutely,
absolutely. As a kid, I came from a very traditional family. My dad worked outside the home. My mom took care of the kids. She stayed at home. So she went, and she didn't drive. So my father would take her to the grocery store every Saturday. All the kids at the house, I was the one who always went with her. I loved going grocery shopping
absolutely,
with my parents. Absolutely. My dad would wait in the car and chat with the other men, and I would go with my mom. And the reason I went is because I always knew I'd get a treat at the end, right?
I know that story very well.
Okay.
But these are the things. So that was your school, though. That was your learning and observing and seeing how mommy handled and what to pick up and buy, and you got to see everything.
Never thought about that, but
that's our learning. We learn by what we see, right? And so that was for you because. It's not a surprise that you're in the career that you are and now in food sovereignty. And you go right to that story about your mom and your dad, right? Absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah. So let's share a little bit about examples that you see that are successes for food sovereignty or projects or initiatives that have been very impactful or significant in the community. Let's flip it that way. Do you know anything that you can share with us?
Well, I do see some stuff happening in the Preston areas. I think I've heard about some really great programs out of East Preston and North Preston and Cherry Brook. And I think, we have large contingents of Black people really advocating and supporting each other. It makes sense that you would see those kind of programs that really things that you need to take care of your community. Yes, and one of the things you need to do is you need to be able to feed your community. And as Black people and as African Nova Scotians, you know how we love our food. We love our food. We love good food. We love fresh food.
That's right.
My mother, she never cooked with anything that you needed instructions for,
right? Yeah.
All of her foods came from Whole Foods, from my father's garden that he still maintained in the country, to the vegetable man and the macro man.
Oh,
and,
that's right.
You know,
I remember all those little men stopping and knocking the door and said, "Do you need this today?" But not only that, taking leftovers and making a whole another meal out of that, right? To feed your family, and also to stretch that portion of meal. And I think those are the things that always makes us so on top of the game when it comes to having stuff, even if it's resources outside of the community. And I think all of us can relate to that, like, bringing the fresh groceries. And that's why we have markets on the weekends, that people can sell their fresh fruits and vegetables or their baked goods or whatever. And that's one way that, one, brings the community together, but we also, again, feed our community. Right? Kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you're just bringing up a whole lot of memories, but traditionally, these are some of the barriers that prevent us from having, unless we, again, that's such changing within how the government does allow or provide access.
Right. And policies. Yeah. This is I started working in this job, at the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, and it's taught me a lot about policies and governance, and realizing that really is where the real power is.
Yes.
And to change policies, to make any kind of, to gain social capital, is around governance and how our systems work, and us really taking control and agency over feeding ourselves. Like, I can't even read half of the things that are on these products that you find in the middle aisles.
Yes.
If I can't read them with, 3 university degrees, I taught kids how to read for 20 years, and yet I struggle with even recognizing what's in my food. So there's a problem with that, and food sovereignty is really about being able to not only know what's in your food, but know how your food was produced.
That's right. Exactly.
And hopefully in an ethical, sustainable way.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, how can local governments and policymakers support food sovereignty in the communities? How can they make sure, right, to endorse or follow through that these are actually taken care of or being changed and effective for the good of the community? What would you... what advice would you say to think about and consider?
So I think it's a mindset. I think it's a mindset change. I think we need to look at moving from a charitable model, which often this is what we do, is that people need food and we feed them. The food banks would be a great example of people providing food for someone, but that person not necessarily having control over, like, what do you get at a food bank, and how do you prepare the food, and even think about newcomers coming to the country and getting a box of food that they don't even know what, vegetables.
Or that they never grew up on, right? Or can relate to, kind of thing. Right, yeah.
So Nicole, if we think about moving away from giving people a free meal to helping people be sustainable and create their own food and find their own food. And it's not food that solves food insecurity. For the most part, it's income. Right? So people need to be better, like need to earn more wages. People need to be a part of the economic movement as well. Collective work, collective responsibility, economic development, I think, is huge when it comes to food sovereignty.
Okay. Listen, I'm with you, because you make all great points. And it's a different way of thinking about our food and how we intake it, but also how we're getting it and who we're getting it from, right? Because I just watched a movie the other day, and it was around that, right? Somebody wanted to produce something faster to save their land, but what they were doing was making people sick, and they knew it, right? So I know it's a movie, but also it's a reflection of something.
That's real life.
Right?
This is definitely
definitely, right? Because where do you get these ideas from? So anyway, let's stick to the topic at hand, because it does. It's a very sensitive topic, but at the end of the day, we need to be healthy, and we need to have long life, to live long and be healthy and strong, especially our elders, right? Like, we have people who are living to 105.
And there are probably people living off the land.
Yes, they are.
Yeah,
yes,
close to the land.
Absolutely.
And, being healthy, when I think about being healthy and what a healthy food is, healthy is about, feeding your body nutritious meals and, getting all your vitamins and your minerals. But it's also about your mental health as well. And it's about your gut health is directly related to your brain health. Absolutely. And all these things are interconnected. So it was actually Cheyenne Jones, who's part of the Just Food Action Plan, our Black working group. But she posed a question. And it's a question that I've heard many times, but the way that she phrased it made me think, and I can't stop thinking about it. Right. So she had mentioned, that old adage, you are what you eat.
Yes.
Well, the question she asked is, if we are what we eat, then what are we? What are we? What am I?
That's a question.
I am what I eat.
Right.
What am I eating?
What are you eating?
That's exactly what I am.
That's right.
And that will reflect in how I manifest, any kind of academic work I'm doing, any kind of workout I want to do, whether I'm able to sleep at night. I am what I eat. Not you are what. I am what I eat. Therefore, if I'm binging on Doritos and fried chicken.
No. I mean, but here's the thing. I know a lot of people get stuck in thinking what they're enjoyable, and it just reminds me of home where there's comfort food, right? But at the same time, at the end of the day, it's also the healthy balance of what those foods are doing. Because even though we digest it, it's still working. It's still going through your system, right? So, yeah, that's a great question. I think that's an excellent question. I think it should be a bumper sticker.
I think every time I go to eat something,
I am what I eat.
And I do like, everything in moderation.
Yes.
That's an old adage as well, and it's so true, everything in moderation. But what really made me think a lot, or actually bothered me, is that I noticed that some students weren't getting any reprieve.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So even when they would talk about some of the things that they would go home and eat in the evening, like highly processed foods, high in sugar, high in fats, and, just realizing the correlation between, your thinking power and how you're able to concentrate. And I know what happens to me when I eat a lot of sugar. I know exactly what happens to me when I eat a lot of sugar. And
don't say what he does.
I get tired. Like I get tired.
Yes,
I'm good, but then I get tired. And what happens when you're in a classroom and you're tired, you can't go to sleep, then you get cranky. And then you want to fight someone.
Right.
And then you're getting in trouble. Now you're a behavior issue.
Right. And then it goes from tired to being wired. Right? And this is like, what's going on with me? And you're trying, but it has a process. Sugar has a process of how it burns off, right? So answer this question for me, because I'm listening to you. And here's what I'm thinking. What role does traditional and indigenous food practices play, right, in the advancement of food sovereignty?
I would say in advancement of food sovereignty, specifically in the advancement of our health. Like us being able to claim back the power to not only heal ourselves, but to be healthy individuals. And I heard a statistic out of the United States, and it said that people who eat their indigenous foods are healthier.
Yeah. And I think that's the common denominator, is your heart health, your overall health, and your mental health. I think those are the common denominators. And if we focus on that and keep our food, you can always elevate. Look, I'm a foodie. I eat all the time. I have a high metabolism, but I know my body structure and I know what I need. And people are like, you're always eating. Yeah, because I burn a lot of energy. So I have to keep that balance, right? Nice. That's different for you. That's different for some of us who are listening and viewing, watching the show right now. But knowing that, right? And how do we feed our body to the maximum without overeating, right? I had, we were talking about how kids eat, and we should never tell kids to finish everything on your plate. We put portions on a plate that we can eat, because you don't want your belly to get used to overeating, because then that becomes a problem.
Right. I when I was about 22 years old, which was quite some time ago, I visited, I went to BC for the first time by myself, and we went to like an authentic Chinese restaurant. There was a woman with us that was able to read the menu. And the one thing that I noticed is that I just had a little bowl with some rice in it, and that I took my proportions as I wanted them. And it was like, that's a total opposite the way that I grew up eating, is you have a big plate of food and you're expected to finish that food. And how do I even know if I want that food? The other thing that I really loved that I thought about over the last, maybe 10 years or so, is this experience that we're missing with our food when we're not touching our food with our hands.
Okay, say that one again.
So the experience that we miss out on when we're eating our food, if we don't actually touch our food with our hands, it's a whole different level of enjoyment, of connection with our food. But I've always been taught to eat with, a utensil or chopsticks or something where, at least if I'm using a
because
chopstick.
That's etiquette. But at the same time, culturally, we have a lot of folks in other countries like, Nigeria and Africa and all this stuff that do. And they encourage you, no, put that down. Mm-hmm. This is how we eat it.
Just touch your food.
Yeah.
Like, feel it. And if you notice some of our favorite foods, are foods that you hold: hot dogs, hamburgers, pizza, like things that French fries, like things that you actually touch. And I think it really does add a level.
Yeah,
and to be honest with you, when I'm at home, if I can eat with my hands, if I can, I do.
Yeah. No, it is. But again, I do that when in the company of mine, because then you start licking and everything's all good. Okay, so how can individuals or families contribute to the movement for food sovereignty when it comes to their daily lives? Is there any advisements or suggestions from you that you can share with them about that?
I would say, the first thing I would say is, if you can, try to buy local.
Yes.
Try to find out, map out your community, who's in your community, who's outside of your community that you get access for food, where you know where it's coming from. And also, this is an abundant time of the year, the summertime, the early fall, when people are harvesting and quite often they have too much lettuce or too many beans. And if people can get together collectively and figure out, what do we have that we can share with each other as well.
That's a great answer. Okay, we're almost to our last questions, but I just want to make sure that I ask everything about it, because this is a topic that we should be discussing, right? And also putting into practice. What are some of the misconceptions around food sovereignty?
You know what? I'm going to say that people think that food sovereignty and food security are the same thing. That's the biggest misconception, is that if I am able to afford food and access food and have the utilities to prepare the food, that I'm food sovereign. But it is a misconception. The biggest misconception is food sovereignty puts the control back in your hands, in the people's hands. And also, Black people profit from Black food sovereignty, and they should.
Oh, and they should. Okay. She means that. Okay, so now what's going next? What's happening next for you? What's Wendie doing now? Because I know we just did a big congratulations to you, and we also know that you're taking a next step in terms of food sovereignty and some travel. Is that correct?
Well, I'm thinking. I just learned about a retreat in Panama where you learn about raw foods and how to kind of nourish your body from the inside out. And so I'm very interested in that. But myself and the Black Work Group, it consists of myself, Cheyenne Jones, Rodney Small, Nikaya Paris, and our newest member, Danielle Jackson.
Oh, Danielle.
Yeah, Danielle has joined us. We kind of consulted with her over the last couple of years, but she's part of the team now. Nice. And one of the things that we really want to do, actually my dream, my own personal dream, but definitely a vision for all five of us, is we want to build a food center. A Black food center. And this center will be a place where people gather in the name of food. It would also be a place where Black people and people of African descent would be able to access food highly subsidized or free. Right. But it would also be a place where people could come around, and it would be a holistic place, a place to heal, a place where you could find other resources, kind of like a wraparound model. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this will really help us think about the journey that we're on in terms of gaining back our health.
Yeah, taking control of that.
Taking control of our health.
Absolutely. And my last question before we wrap this up, what about our youth? Because most of the time they're depending on their parents or whoever the guardian is to provide food for them. But for the ones that are out there working and learning their independence, what would you say to them around food sovereignty?
I would say get interested. Know about your food. Find out where your food is coming from. Right now, actually in October, Nova Scotia will introduce a universal school food program. Nice. There's about $18 million that the province allocated to this universal food program for the province. But at the federal level, we received, Canadian citizens, $1 billion over 5 years for a universal school food program. And I think this is a great way for students to start getting interested and knowledgeable knowledgeable around things around food literacy. I think it's a great way for students to take control over what they're eating, have
Absolutely.
a say in
And
what they're eating, knowing where their food comes from, and an opportunity for them to apprentice and see demonstrations and models of people that are doing these things.
Absolutely. Great answer. You're such a great guest. And we can talk to Wendie all day, but this was Wendie Wilson, and we've been talking to her about food sovereignty, talking to her about what's the importance of and how we can get involved and the effects that it has on our communities. If you haven't subscribed to this channel already, right here, you can do so now and click on the notification bell. I'm Nicole Johnson, and we will see you